Hello, Dr. Franz here. On the subject of biblical stewardship, I thought it would be helpful to walk through one of the many New Testament passages on this topic. So let's consider Matthew 25, verses 14 to 30, and I'll be using the ESV translation. The context is Jesus is teaching here about his return, and for the people to be ready, awake, and even busy in his kingdom work. Which brings us to these words, starting in verse 14. For it will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. Well, first we have a coincidence of language here. The talents mentioned here have nothing to do with human talents or ability. A talent was a weight of money. However, there's an interesting irony here. The MacArthur Study Bible notes that the modern meaning of the word talent, denoting a natural ability, stems from the fact that this parable is erroneously applied to the stewardship of one's natural gifts. Or put in different words, the NIV Study Bible writes, the present-day use of talent to indicate an ability or gift is derived from this parable. So here is a case where a parable in the New Testament literally influenced our English language usage. But we're interested in how Jesus meant this and how it was understood at the time. A talent was, in fact, a very large weight of money, the largest unit of money they had. The ESV commentary writes, a talent was a weight of metal, normally silver, and typically 75 pounds. Although the amount could vary from one place and time to another. The purchasing power of 1 talent was 6,000 denarii, the equivalent of 20 years' wages for an ordinary laborer. A laborer would toil 100 years to earn 5 talents. So this was not a likely scenario Jesus was setting up with such a high amount of money given to 3 persons. The talent was most used by government in moving money. And if a nation conquered another nation, well, that's when they often demand a large payment in talents of silver and or gold. Not many people had even 1 talent, much less 8 talents total, to give to 3 people to invest for him or her. So what would immediately come to mind of the hearers was the extraordinary wealth given to these 3 men to manage, an indication, we think, of the high value, the extraordinary importance of what was to be managed. And it becomes pretty clear by the end of the parable that Jesus is illustrating the stewardship of our lives to God. Super valuable. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who made the 2 talents made 2 talents more. So these 2 men immediately devoted themselves to the further growth of what was given to them. They spent their lives managing and using these funds so as to generate a great profit for the master. While they immediately set to work, I'm sure they didn't double their money right away, but gradually over time. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. The last man with the single talent buried the talent. He didn't embezzle it. He didn't spend it lavishly on himself. Nothing so obviously sinful. He buried it. There it was for whenever the master came back. And then he went on with his life. What a difference between the two who were working with that huge sum of money to manage, and that kind of wealth would take a lot of time and work to manage well, just like with foundation workers or professional investors today who manage large sums. It's a full-time vocation. These two were on task, busy managing those significant funds, while one was not involved at all. The talent was safely hidden underground while he lived as he had before. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more. So a significant time passed, but then the final accounting. You can hear the excitement of this first man. He was so glad to share with the master, I've worked with what you have entrusted me and was able to double your investment. Already 5 talents was almost an unthinkable amount of money for one person to even imagine, much less manage. But now there was 10 talents, an extraordinary achievement. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Well, did you catch the shocking sentence? The master said, You've been faithful with a little. Well, nobody then or now would call that huge amount of wealth little. But here it is compared to his master's unfathomable wealth. Now I'll let you manage much in my kingdom. Come into the joy of your master. An allusion to the glorious future with the Lord. 5 and now 10 talents is little in value when compared to the value of the glory God has in store for us. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered me 2 talents. Here, I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also was excited to bring the news of now 4 talents to give back to the master, and he receives the same praise. Remember, each was said to have been given their initial amount according to their ability. So the master knew what these men were capable of. The one had the ability to manage 5, another 2, another 1. And so the reward from the master is not reckoned just by the total amount at the end, but how each, according to their God-given ability, was faithful. As Jesus said elsewhere, everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required, and from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand the more. And then there was the last man. What was his story? Notice how he addressed the master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. A truly startling statement to the master. In this story, if the first 2 men were off to the side and heard this spoken to the master, they would be astonished. What was a privilege of stewardship to them was a burden to this man. He excused his whole lack of commitment to this task of managing a talent of wealth, or 20 years of wages, by blaming the shrewd character of the master, who the man says was a hard man to deal with, someone fearful who wants things where he has not labored. And so the man concluded, I did the only reasonable thing. I buried it in the ground. Here you are, every last ounce of this 75 pounds of precious metal. But His master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I have scattered no seed? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers. At my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. Now, notice that the master still referred to this man being his servant, something the man had quite put aside and tagged in a negative way. The master, interestingly here, did not defend his own character and honor. He did label the character of the man wicked and lazy, slothful. The man had wickedly reinvented the character of the master into something that excused his own laziness. The third man just didn't want the responsibility and the work of managing all that money for the master. He wanted to just live his own life, not serve the master. So he quickly disposed of the talent in a hole. Then the master pointed out how inconsistent that feeble excuse was. If the master was terribly shrewd with money, then at the very least you should have put all that money to the lenders, kind of like bankers, so that the master could at least have the interest from that. In other words, to delegate the work to others. Yes, those bankers would take most of the profits, but you would get some. However, the man is wicked and lazy. He doesn't want that work and responsibility, and he certainly doesn't want to do it for the master, whom he has transformed into a horrible person. The master then ordered, So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even that what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into outer darkness. In that place will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So the destination of the third man is to be contrasted with the first two, who entered into the joy of the master, eternity with God. Again, the context of this passage was that while we are eagerly awaiting the return of the Lord, we are to be busy for God's kingdom. Doing what? Using the extremely valuable investment God has given to each of us, our lives. They all were blessed with something very valuable, 5, 2, and 1 talents. And these 3 are presented as a sample of what God has done with all of humanity. Some have been given more, some have been given less. Some shirk any connection with the master, bury it and put it out of sight, while others devote their whole lives to what God has given. So we have the privilege of fulfilling His divine destiny for us, of enthusiastically embracing our stewardship to this almighty master of all we are and have. And as we do so, we'll find ourselves alongside many others in God's kingdom. And they're doing the same. And a lot of our energies as stewards will be invested in those in the kingdom, those other participants, the church, as well as for those outside the church. This calling by the Almighty God is priceless. I'm also inspired by the excitement of these 2 men and how they poured themselves in the task, and were so delighted to share with the master when he returned how they were able to make so much more. They were all in for the task of stewardship. They caught the privilege. Their lives were transformed and given a whole new purpose, with no regrets at the end of their journey. And as valuable as their wealth they managed was, nothing compared to what they were blessed with in the future, including the privilege of managing more for the master in the future. Our lives are in God's hands. He gave us this life. He sustains it moment by moment, from each heartbeat to every molecule and atom within us. We have an astounding privilege to be obedient stewards day by day within his victorious kingdom program. And like those two men, we should be excited for this. There's also the fact that these two men were able to make more talents. The value of what we can do through the Lord, the eternal good that we can accomplish by him, it's all way more valuable than what we know or can fathom. And then finally, we saw how the Lord so generously rewarded his servants who were faithful. Though when we are in heaven, I'm sure we'll be affirming often how every bit of glory ultimately belongs to him. Thanks very much.